Hi, and welcome to my review of the Up and Under series. Is that what it's called? It's an odd name for a series. This is a spin-off from the Middle Game, or Alchemical Journeys series. It is written in the pen name of A. Deborah Baker by Shauna McGuire. This will not necessarily be spoiler heavy. I may or may not get into it at the end of the discussion, but if you just want a general synopsis, like a general overview, that'll be the bulk of this. And if and when I get into spoilers, I will let you know. I have read through this series, and when the book came out, I got an ARC for it, audio ARC. Very appreciative of that to Nick Alley and the publisher. And for good measure, I went back and I re-listened to all the books in the series to make myself prepared for this review. It is coming about a month or so after I did that, because I've not been making content, but we're here now, and I want to talk to you about the Up and Under series and my thoughts on whether or not it is good and worth listening to, or worth reading, rather. So the story of Up and Under is about Avery and Zib, two kids from completely different worlds. That is probably the wrong choice of words, considering this is Shauna McGuire, from completely different realms of their world of Earth. Well, Zib is wild and all over the place, and she likes to take risks, and she doesn't like to be too constricted. Avery is very proper, and he doesn't like doing things that are risky or too adventurous. He wants things to be ordered and straightforward and planned out. And we have these two very contrasting characters who basically end up over a magical wall into a magical world. If you've read Shauna McGuire's Wayward Children series, and you're familiar with that concept of children going into a magical world. And that's what this is. We basically have a series that is like an extended book of the Wayward Children series. In fact, I feel like this series could actually exist within the Wayward Children world. Unfortunately, the story never quite lives up to the Wayward Children series. That's perhaps intersecting the two worlds isn't quite the right choice, because it might devalue the Wayward Children series. I do love that series. But at its core, it is like a Wayward Children story. Two kids who are very different, trapped in another world to learn a lesson. And that's really what this is. They're going on to the impossible city, to the impossible road. And the story is intended to be a sort of imagery for the alchemical arts that A. Deborah Baker has done. And in that vein, what is it that if I was an alchemist reading the series, what am I supposed to be getting? The stories, they tread across 4 different kingdoms: fire, water, air, and earth. That's what it is. Each of these different elements sort of represent different peoples of the Up and Under. These are people who are born in each kingdom are made primarily of that element, whether it be water or air, earth or fire. And it's supposed to represent a certain mentality. Fire is wild and uncontrollable. Earth is rigid and hard to move. And that's as far as my memory of the imagery goes there. But that sort of gives you an idea of how we have these elements sort of embodied in different people. And in that sense, one of the things I got most out of rereading the series was appreciating the foreshadowing of how the characterization of Zib and Avery put them into each of these worlds, as in it made them more of one world than another. They are of Earth. That is to say, they're Earthlings, but that doesn't mean they aren't also in some ways made of some combination of fire, earth, earth being not our earth, but literal ground, I guess, air and fire. And I appreciate those things. I feel like when it comes to what I'm supposed to understand that A. Deborah Baker is trying to communicate, I think it is that idea of what is embodied in these different elements. How that would be communicated to me becoming an alchemist, I have no idea. But it's interesting to think about what the intent of this series is, not just from Shauna McGuire, but from the figure for whom is supposed to be writing the story within Middle Game. So that was something I thought was interesting, and something, I guess, if you haven't read the story, to look out for. Consider each element as you learn about it, each kingdom being representative of a different element. As you learn about it, consider how that compares and contrasts to our main characters. So I have had sort of a roller coaster of feelings with this series. I loved, like many people, Middle Game. And naturally, that excitement, that hype of Middle Game got me excited for The Up and Under, for what was the first book, Over the Woodward Wall. And I loved it at the time, and I'm glad I read it. I'm glad it's made. But at the same time, I wonder whether or not it needed more than what we got. Like, the premise there was nice. This book that's meant to act as sort of a guide and also imagery for the alchemical arts used by alchemical magicians or whatever in Middle Game. But the ideas that Sean McGuire had, while it felt very fleshed out in this first book, didn't necessarily come together all that well as things went along. Worst of all, it just felt like she didn't know quite what she was wanting to get from it right away. There's a lot of me my major curiosity with this series is just wanting to understand her writing approach here. When did she write Over the Woodward Wall, and when did she decide to make it more than just that one book? And at what point did she decide what that series would be encompassed of? Like, did she write the second book knowing where she would be in book 3 and 4? Or did she write the second book and then realize, I'm only getting 4 books, so I need to now round this out? And I don't know the answers to that. I'm fascinated just because of the way this series came about. It's just that it's the logistics of it that excites me the most for some reason about this series. And I feel like if I understood that, I might understand some of the choices he made a bit more. The first thing that always appeared to me, that sort of seemed off to me in this series, was the first book is a bunch of imagery to a number of other fairy tales. And I felt like it was an amazingly written book. I love the whimsical writing of Sean McGuire, and this felt like a great homage to a lot of great works. By the second book, I liked how we got more mythos in the world, but it felt like it became more serialized. Like, the first book wasn't about making a book. It wasn't about making a series. We had a range of different obstacles for our characters to go through, and it felt like the story was evolving very quickly, and we're getting so much of this world. But then we get on to book 2, and it felt like we fixated on one obstacle for so long. And I remember that bothered me a lot. It doesn't bother me quite as much upon my second or third reread for this review, but it does stand out as being distinctly different from the first. It feels like she did something for the first one, and then she decided to try something new, or either she felt like she had to do something different for these next books. As we get to book 3 and 4, well, the third one, it's similar to the second one in the sense that we have one major obstacle, but it still felt like there was a bit more going on. I know that my feelings were different than the people's. I loved the third book, and for me, I felt like that was largely just emotional. I had an emotional connection to the characters and to what was going on, and I just felt a very strong reaction. And while others felt like it wasn't quite as strong as the first book, it's like the first and second book, and I can see that. I think as actual storytelling goes, it was a bit more messy. And then we get to the fourth one. I liked the story just fine. The problem was that I felt like we just suddenly pivoted. Like, we need to finish the story, so we're here, now quick, pivot to the ending. And that transition was just clunky. It didn't quite work for me, which is unfortunate. I reread it, to keep that in mind. I reread the whole series after reading the last one because I wanted to get a better picture. And I see where everything ties in, almost to the point where it feels like it was all premeditated. I mean, I'm sure some of it was, some of it might have been retroactively connected, but it just felt like she had this idea in mind, and while much of the structure was there to make it a solid series with plenty of imagery foreshadowing what was going to be going down, with each book really just fixating, I think, on a different king and queen of the area. That's really the main idea here. Even though it felt like the structure was different to me, I now realize there was some semblance of a structure to each book. It's just that while that was all there, the transition from that to the finale just felt abrupt. It's unfortunate because it sort of feeds into my idea of the series as being a product of something better. And we have a good origin story that then promotes the publisher to want to make this a standalone series. And while I like having it, I'm just acutely aware of the fact that It feels like a capitalist venture more than a creative one. And that just feels so mean to say because I love Sean McGuire. And I feel like the first book is just so good. I think it really embodies a good, like it feels like a real story within this world model game and very realized. It's just when she tries to craft it into an overarching narrative, structurally, this doesn't feel entirely believable, which maybe that isn't that big of a deal. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. But to me, I guess it kind of is. I guess if I'm imagining what the goal and ambitions of A. Deborah Baker was, I shouldn't be thinking to myself, this feels like someone who is writing a story as she begins to understand what her publisher will allow or what the plans of the publisher will have for her. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she had intended this to be four books from the very beginning. I don't know, but it doesn't feel like that. And if I want to believe A. Deborah Baker wrote these books, I believe A. Deborah Baker would have had a very deliberate, succinct outline where that would have been, I don't know, just more expert, that would have felt like it was intended to be 4 books and needed to be 4 books. And as others have sort of said as they reviewed this last book, it doesn't feel like it really needed to be 4 books. It could have been shorter. And that's just unfortunate because it just takes away from the significance of the series as, I don't know what I wanted for this to be. I feel like I'm harping on this one idea. It's really not that important. The structurally just didn't quite work. Simple as that. The ending, all in all, I liked. I felt like I was surprised, and it felt like it was getting to a dark place. It's a bit safe in some places, but I know the first time I read it, I was surprised on how far I was willing to go. It was compelling enough for me. Like, I feel like I'm talking shit about this series, but I liked it a lot. I would probably give it a solid 3 stars for the series. And I guess if I'm reviewing the 4th book, I probably gave it I gave it 4 stars. The takeaway, I guess, is that the structure or the artificial nature of the structure made it feel like it lacked the realism that I would have liked or felt like was necessary to make this a really successful book. What I loved most about the series, or rather when I was in love with the series, it was when I felt like I was there with Avery and Zib. When I was walking the Olympic Road, no. Walking the impossible road with them in this world. When I talk about book 3 and how much love I had there, it was just because for whatever reason, I was able to just really get immersed in the story. For me, that's where this series shines, is that I do love our main characters, and I do feel, like a strong connection to them. They are very contrasting people, almost to the point of caricature, but there's a point of evolution and learning, and I feel like I could sort of connect with each of them a bit. And for that reason, my love of the series all in all, I think, stems from the characters at the core. Now, whether or not it's actually worth reading, I don't know. If you love Middle Game, you should read the first one. Depending on how much love you have for that, why not give it the rest a go? At the very least, I feel like you should get a feel of what this series is going to be in the first one. And if you don't like the first one, I would say you can stop, because that's the best it's going to be, is in the first one. All in all, I like this series. It is still fun. I don't think it's bad in any aspect. Like, I'm not disappointed that I read it. I mean, after all, I liked enough to read it twice. Granted, most of that was for the sake of this review, but I still feel like I'm glad that I have this more so than not. Even though I feel like I see some cracks in the themes of the story, it is still a fun journey that I appreciate having. Like, I appreciate getting to know Avery and Zib. I would be curious to know whether or not you've read any of this series. Let me know in the comments. And as always, hope you have a great day, stay safe, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.